rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey.
Welcome to this edition of the English language class. Today we're doing a short story titled The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Actually, it's a fairy tale and it's very interesting. Okay, let's come to Oscar Wilde. You know, once upon a time in the city of Dublin in Ireland, there was a man born Wilde. Yes, it is spelled W-I-L-D-E. His father, Sir William Wilde, was a successful surgeon. His mother, Lady Jane, was a poet and a nationalist. Now, coming from this privileged background with a high intellectual quotient, Oscar Wilde's genius budded and blossomed very early. And in the University of Oxford, he was a brilliant student. He won a prize for his poem titled Ravenna, and he went on to be mentored by two of his professors, Walter Pater and John Ruskin. Walter Pater was the professor, the person who started this literary movement called Art for Art's Sake. Now, Art for Art's Sake talks about, separating art from life. Everyone looks for a moral in a story. That's the way we think a good story should be. But then an artist is looking for self-expression. He's perhaps searching for beauty or truth. And it is that satisfaction of expression that he's longing for. And he perhaps feels confined when there's only a story with a moral attached to it. So given this kind of a conflict, Walter Pater asked for a separation between art and life. John Ruskin had a more balanced approach, and he wanted art and life to be well balanced together. Oscar Wilde was more with Walter Pater in this argument, and his work reflects. His well-crafted writings show his technique as a writer was taken very seriously, and he was also known as an excellent speaker. He was a much sought after dinner guest. Now, after his innings at Oxford University, a break of 2 years, and he comes out with his volume of poems. It is titled Poems. What did he do in that span of 2 years? Well, he got married to Constance Lloyd, had 2 sons, and also was the editor of a magazine. Oscar Wilde went on to become famous for his stage production called The Importance of Being Earnest. It was a comedy, and he went on to have 4 or 5 more stage plays. He also wrote a short story titled The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now, The Picture of Dorian Gray was more serious and looked at the concerns of an artist. And you will find that later he took up fairy tales, and there are 2 volumes of fairy tales that he has written. What exactly would we be having to do with a fairy tale? We are young adults, not children, right? But a fairy tale is a very interesting mode of storytelling. This is the way we were always, grabbed and caught the attention. Whenever we were bored, we would look up to Grandma for her fairy tales, and it would inevitably begin with once upon a time and go on and on and on and end with, and they lived happily ever after. Somewhere in the time that Oscar Wilde was born, there was another writer called Hans Christian Andersen. Hans Christian Andersen was this fairy story writer, fairy tale writer, and he's come up with brilliant fairy tales that has captured even the attention of adults. And perhaps you've come across 2 of his, The Snow Queen, maybe, and also The Little Mermaid. Yes, these strangely have a sad ending. Happy sad ending. I won't say it's just a sad ending. All right, when a storyteller brings in that shade of sadness into the ending, I think it makes the story seem more real. Because when we say happily ever after and the prince and princess walked away into the sunset, yeah, sounds good, but not so real. Okay, so the fairy tale that Hans Christian Andersen put together had this happy sad ending, and Oscar Wilde's stories also were on those lines. Actually, they had a slightly serious note to it. Coming to the story, The Selfish Giant. Once upon a time, there lived a giant in a castle with a beautiful garden around it. This giant decided to take a holiday, and he said he's going off to see his cousin, who's a Cornish ogre, and he obviously lives in Cornwall area in London. And when he goes to see this ogre, he spends a long time with him and gets back home. Obviously, he was happy to get back home. Now, what is this giant ogre? I'm sure you know a giant is a great big tall person, maybe double, triple, 4 times our size. And an ogre? Maybe you've seen Shrek, have you? Okay, Shrek was this great big ugly monster. An ogre, yeah, they're supposed to be monsters. But Shrek was a nice, funny, friendly monster. So perhaps even the selfish giant's cousin friend was a nice ogre. Anyway, let's get back to the story. So he comes back home and this beautiful garden is there and the flowers are blooming, the fruits are full, the birds are singing, the grass is green, the flowers are blooming, and what else is there in the garden? Children, lots and lots of them. They're all playing and enjoying themselves. They're having a lovely time in the garden. What else would children be doing? Yeah, gardens and children, they love to have a great time there. Hanging from the trees, tumbling in the grass, grabbing a fruit or two to eat, and nobody to stop them. The selfish giant looked at this and said, No, this cannot be. The garden is mine. This is my garden. Everyone, just clear out of here. You've got to leave this place. And so he chased them out, built up a huge wall, high wall around it, and then put up a board that says, trespassers will be prosecuted. Now, that sounded very serious. So nobody ever came back to that garden again. And the giant sat back there and he enjoyed the garden. Oh, how he loved it. Time went by, slowly spring, summer, autumn, the leaves started falling, winter, it became cold and chilly. And what happened then? Very cold it was. There was the north wind blowing, snow and frost settled there, and gradually even the hail started rattling the windows, breaking the tiles on the roof, and it looked like winter was going on and on and on, and the giant was feeling so cold. But what was happening outside? Outside? It had changed to spring. Everyone was laughing. They were having a good time. And what happened to the children? Well, the children were still playing on the dusty roads. It was not a nice place out there, but they couldn't help it. They were playing, but they were playing on the road, which was very dusty. And the other gardens, well, they had flowers, they had fruits, they had lovely birds singing there. Everything went on as usual, but for the selfish giant. He was waiting and waiting and waiting, and one day he wakes up and he heard a beautiful song. He thought it was an orchestra that broke out. Actually, it was only one bird, just a bird singing. For him, it sounded like an orchestra because it was ages since a bird even visited that place. And he came out to have a look at this strange scene, slowly saw kids playing here and there, went out, looked a little closer and found that there was a little hole in the wall where children had come into one by one, made themselves very, very, very quietly happy. Now that was the scene. What did the giant do? Was he angry? Was he mad? Not at all. He was so happy. He was happy that spring had come back again. All was good and happy once more. But can you imagine, in one little spot of the garden, there was a little boy sitting and crying and crying and crying because he could not reach the tree. You know, some kids can really get annoying, but this kid was crying for a real reason. And that patch of the garden had snow on it. It was cold, unlike the rest of the garden. Somehow the giant felt really sad, went up to that little kid and put him up on the branch. Immediately, winter fled. Not even a patch of winter was left in his garden, and it was spring once more. He loved the boy. Spring had come back into the giant's life. And the happiness of doing a little act of kindness can bring back the spring into our lives. Perhaps that can be a moral. A change of seasons, a change of heart. Yes, there was a change of heart followed by a change in the season. So you can see how people's lives and the time of the year is connected. The selfish giant didn't seem to be selfish anymore. He said, okay, the garden is all yours. You can enjoy it. I'm enjoying the summer that you're bringing in, and you enjoy the flowers, the trees, the grass, and the birds. Let's enjoy it together. There was a change in the giant's heart. Change is an inevitable part of life. We are born, we grow old, older, and then die. The cycle of seasons goes on. We start with spring, summer, autumn, when there is ripening and fruitfulness and harvest, and finally winter, when the season closes. This is how nature, this is how life goes on. But there is another word that I want to give you today, and that word is related to change. It's called transformation. That word is also taken from nature. Have you watched a caterpillar? I'm sure you did it in your natural science classes. Your teacher would have given you the life cycle of a butterfly, right? And you would have perhaps labeled it and neatly done the whole thing, just as I did when I was a kid. Anyway, so this life cycle, as we put it in diagrams and in writing on our notebooks, actually when we look at it in real life, it's a miracle of rebirth. The transformation from an ugly caterpillar to a beautiful butterfly. That's what nature calls a transformation. I remember another fairy tale. It's called The Ugly Duckling. You know, there was a change from the ugly duckling that thought it was so very, very ugly. It changes after a time into a beautiful swan. Yes, that beautiful swan stands for transformation. Now, in the giant's life, this change of heart was not temporary. It was not just, for that short season. All right, spring has come, we're happy, now you can go away. No, that change came and it stayed and it became a part of his life. Now there was one thing that was missing in his life. You know, time went on, the years went on, he got older, but he was still looking out for that little boy who made him so happy, who brought back the spring into his life. That little boy never came back. He asked all the children, "Where is this boy?" And they said, "We don't know who he is." And one day, as it was getting a little colder, he saw just one child playing under a tree. His heart took a big jump, and it was that boy he was missing. He ran up there, and when he saw him, he was shocked, because on this small boy, on his hands and on his feet, he saw nail prints. And he said, "Who did this to you? I am very angry, and I am going to beat him up." The giant was really angry. And the child just smiled and said, "These are love wounds." The child smiled. And the giant just stopped in his tracks. There was something about this child that held him back, and something that he learned from this child about those wounds, really serious, and still the smile with which he took it. And he asked the child a question, and he said, "Who are you?" The child said, "I've played with you in your garden. You have shared your garden with me. Yeah, and I am going to share paradise with you." The next day, people came around, and when they looked up the giant, they found that he was peacefully sleeping, and he was sleeping for a long, 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 long time, and it was going to be for eternity. So you see that there was a change in the giant of heart, there was a change in his years, and there's something that brought about that change. Okay? So when there is something that brings about a change, we call it an agent. And in his case, it was a little child who stole his heart. A sad ending, that the giant had to die, but also a happy one, because he was going to be happy, happy, happy forever in a place called paradise. So this is how the story, in a beautiful way, deals with the theme of change or transformation. Being grown up doesn't mean, getting old and having all the aches and all the pains and having all the sicknesses and having all the miseries. This can still be joy in one's heart and make us feel young and happy again. And that was the transformation that ended and changed the selfish giant's life. The Selfish Giant is a simple, beautiful story written by Oscar Wilde. All's well that ends well. That's what Shakespeare said. And that seems to be the ending of The Selfish Giant also. But you get a feeling that there's something else at work here in the story. Most of us don't like to see a child badly treated, do we? We don't like a child to be hurt deliberately. And something in all of us, rises up, and we protest when we see a child badly treated. Now, who is this child, and why was this child badly treated? What do those nail prints in particular point out to? Yes, when we say nail prints, we remember Christ on the cross and the prints on his hand, on his palms and his feet. Now the child connects to Christ through a symbol of innocence. The symbol of innocence is what connects the child, the nail prints, and Christ on the cross. The love and the innocence is what the child symbolizes. Oscar Wilde has used the child as a symbol of innocence and love. Now, when we take a story and we are trying to put an idea across, and the idea is a little hard to explain, we put people into it and make it easier. A story of this kind is also called an allegory. So, the fairy tale, the selfish giant, is also working at a different level with a symbol and an allegory. It's telling a story of love, innocence, childhood, sacrifice, and so many other values are what Oscar Wilde touches. He just doesn't say it. One symbol is enough to say it all. That's how he wraps up the story so beautifully and makes it a story that has universal appeal. It can appeal to an adult, it can appeal to a child, it can appeal to anyone of any faith, because the values of love, of innocence, of childhood, of sacrifice, of patience are things that we all share together. With that, I would like to come to an end of this story called The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Happy reading. Read it aloud and get the whole charm of the story. If you can, maybe sit in a group and read it aloud. Let your friends enjoy it. Then you'll know that he was a real successful storyteller and a writer as well.